Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Today is Tuesday, March the 25th, and I'm glad to say that we get another opportunity to just open the Word of God together. Trust you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed, and ready to begin a new day. We are in the New Testament portion of our study now. If you want all the latest information, you can get on our website at bethanychurch.com, get all of the lasest resources and everything that we're using for this study. It is a study that is known as CASKET Empty, and we've just finished the Old Testament portion, which was CASKET, which is an acronym, right, for Creation, Abraham, Sinai, Kings, Exile, Temple. Those are 6 periods in Israel's history that can summarize much of what is going on in our Old Testament. And now we're going to be looking at the New Testament acronym, EMPTY. And I thought we'd spend a little bit of time this morning just becoming a little bit more familiar with what we will be doing this week. And then we'll look at a couple of passages towards the end of the week that just speak to the theme of this week's lesson, and that is week 1 is one redemptive story. It's about this one story of God that begins in Genesis and continues all the way through to the book of Revelation. So this is what we are about this week. Now, in this Casket Empty series, right, we are looking now at this EMPTY acronym, and I thought I would just begin by just giving you some like a brief overview of what to expect as we go through our study. E is all about expectations. Expectations is really referring to this period of time between the end of the Old Testament book of Malachi and the beginning of our New Testament in the Gospel of Matthew. And there's a lot for us to unpack during this period. The problem is that we have to look to other sources to kind of fill in some of these gaps. There are a number of historians that have written, one of which, Josephus, is one of the better known. Excuse me. And he has given us really good insight into what had been taking place during this 400 period between Malachi and Matthew. We see that there has been a change in the nations that were exercising control over this, plot of land. We had gone just in our Old Testament study, right? We remember the Assyrians coming in, and they had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. Then the Babylonians came, beat up on the Assyrians, but also overwhelmed the southern kingdom, and also came up against Egypt at that time as well, and pushed Egypt back. So Babylon extended its reign. There was a 70-year period before Persia came onto the scene, and Persia, came and they would defeat Babylon. And under Persia's rule, all the people were allowed to go back. So these are periods of time that we can read about, right? In some of the Old Testament prophets like Jeremiah, right? Obadiah, Nahum. We can read about Haggai, Ezra, Nehemiah. These are all books that are focused in this one period of time, and they will begin to give us some insight into what was taking place with these foreign nations coming and the dominance that they had. But after that, we're going to read and study that, like in this week, it's all about the coming of these kingdoms that are on the horizon. We will find that the Greeks will come, and the Greeks will dominate for a period of time. Their influence on the culture will be far-reaching. we will find that then from the Greeks, we will have, the Romans, right? The Romans will come, and before them, the Maccabees. These are all that will be mentioned in our study next week. But you could see that this is an area that sometimes, or a period of time that a lot of people think is just silent, but it's not silent. There's a lot going on. And if you think about, recently I just did one of my rooms. We have a little television room, and we had to replace the carpet. And the money for the carpet, I could buy hardwood, and problem is I had to put the hardwood down, right? But I could buy it for a third of what I was going to pay for carpet. So I bought hardwood, and I spent the last couple of weeks just putting that down, and I finished on this past Saturday. A lot of work, but I'm glad I did it. It came out great. But here's the thing: like, the preparation for the hardwood was just about as long as it was, for to laying down the hardwood. I mean, I ripped out the carpet. I had to roll that up, in pieces. The underlayment of the carpet, take that up. All the staples that was in there, all the moldings around the room, I had to take out the nails, right? Then reinforce the floor, put on top of the floor another subflooring, glued that down, nailed that down, before I finally even got to put one piece of hardwood down on the ground. So, like any project, right? You know what it's like. You want to paint a room, you got to clean the room, you got to edge it, you got it. There's all these steps. It's never just going right into the renovation. Well, here it's the same thing. Like, these 400 years, God is very busy creating an environment so that when Jesus comes, it will be, as it says in Galatians, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, born under the law, born of a virgin, that he might redeem those under the law. So there was this whole redemptive act that was planned, and God was working towards that. And they had to get everything prepared. And that, as we will see next week, we'll give a little bit more clarity on what that means. But God was really preparing the way as he was raising up these various kingdoms. And the contributions that they made only aided in the propagation of the gospel. So this whole period of expectations is going to be a bit of a history lesson that many people normally don't receive when they are reading their Bibles, but it's really important. And it also speaks about the kinds of expectations that people were having during this period about Jesus. Waiting now for the second return of Jesus. And people now, right, we conjure up all kinds of scenarios, like when is he going to come? How is he going to come? Is this the days in which we're living? But according to the scriptures, the last days are this period of time between Jesus's first coming and his second coming. And we have been engaged in waiting for God to unfold all of this work. Think about it. We studied the Old Testament. We date back, a few thousand years, and then we could just see how history was unfolding. Just from about 1400, BC with the times of Abraham and Moses, and then running all the way down to the present time. So God is very busy during this period of time, and people had all kinds of expectations of what this Messiah was going to be like. That this kingdom that God had promised would become inaugurated. Here's one of the things, if you look in the timeline, I hope that many of you went out and purchased this timeline. The New Testament timeline will open up and give you all kinds of really great information. And one of those is about this whole sense of expectation, Messiah. It just opens up so that all this information is summarized there for you. So as you study, it's a great tool to go back and look at. And under that heading of expectations, you'll see that there's a number of what points that are enumerated there about how Israel expects the Messiah, and it's really informative, and it helps you to get an understanding of what's taking place during this period of the Old Testament, Malachi, all the way to the Gospel of Matthew. Well, following that, we have what now is Messiah, because we're following this acronym of empty, right? So M stands for Messiah. Now, one of the things that I want you to recognize, that this coming of Jesus, this is all listed for us in our Bibles. We get a greater appreciation for what, how Jesus came into this world, what he did in this world, right? His life. And so we're going to be taking a different view as we go through the books of the New Testament. So, for instance, if there was an accident and you had people standing on, let's say it happened at an intersection, and you had people standing, right, or busy on all the four corners of that accident, they would all get a different perspective on the accident that happened. Much of what they say would corroborate with each other. Sometimes, once in a while, somebody will give you some other information that maybe was not, visible to the people on the other corners. And that's how I want you to think about the Gospels. You have the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And those four Gospels are giving us insight into Jesus's life and his ministry. They are these biographical accounts of the life of Jesus. Each one has a little bit different of an emphasis. Mark is the shortest of them all, right? And he just jumps right in. It's like he wants you to understand the facts of what is happening. And there is this sense of the immediacy of God's kingdom just, being unfolded. And then you have Matthew, who is spending time making sure that the references to Jesus are seen clearly in the Old Testament prophecies. Matthew has a tremendous amount of references to the Old Testament in his gospel. So just for instance, in the birth narratives, when the announcement is made that Jesus is born, it says this is to fulfill what the prophet said. The prophet Isaiah said, "When a virgin shall be with child and give birth to a son, and you shall name him Emmanuel, God with us." See, this is a Matthew's way of making sure that people are not missing that Jesus is the promised Messiah that had been, heralded throughout the Old Testament. You have Luke, who sees Jesus as the Son of Man, and takes a very, very careful, analysis. And he says it right in the beginning of his book, right? I have studied and come up with this detailed account of the life of Jesus so that you might have certainty in what you believe. And so Luke takes this very seriously. And actually, Luke is one of those writers that people don't really think about it this way, but Luke is responsible for the majority of your New Testament, because Luke wrote not only the Gospel of Luke, but Luke would also write the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. Combined together, they make up a hefty portion of your New Testament, more so than the letters that Paul would write. So Luke gives you this view of Jesus and his life and ministry from this perspective of the Son of Man. And so much of the humanity of Jesus, his compassion, is brought out in many of the stories that Luke will bring forward. And then you have John. And John gives us this this divine look at Jesus, making no bones about it. He wants us to see that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and he wants us to come to faith. In fact, in John's gospel, if you go to John chapter 20 and verse 35, it says that very text that I just read to you. It says there, these things I have written to you so that you might know that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. So the whole tenor of the book of John was written so that people would come to faith. This past weekend, we had David Cullum, CEO for Pocket Testament League, come and share his testimony and the work that they're doing. One of the unique things that the Pocket Testament League does is they have produced these little booklets that just can fit in your pocket. And they are of the Gospel of John, 21 pages. And the 21 chapters of John are placed in this little booklet, and they put out this challenge. They have given over 55 million. They had presented the gospel to over 55 million over the past 5 years. 30,000 a day are meeting Jesus across the world. Think about that. That's a phenomenal. And how do they do it? Very often through it's done primarily through volunteers, people coming up to friend and neighbor, right? And just giving them these little booklets and challenging them to read just one chapter a day, because they know the gospel is powerful. The gospel is able to bring life. It is the good news of God in Jesus. And they tell story after story after story of people in urban areas, in people out in the rural areas, people in very remote places in the world. But they come to know Jesus. They hear this word and they respond to it, and it shouldn't surprise us. That's exactly why the Gospel of John was written. That's why I think about it. So many people who make professions of faith, aren't they because they have heard stories that, like, for instance, they read in John 1 where it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Or how about John 3:16? God so loves the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. How about John 11, where he says, I am the resurrection and the life. He who is dead, though believing in me, will find life. Or John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. See, all of these texts were written so that you and I would know that Jesus is this promised Messiah, and that by believing we would have life in his name. So Messiah in this study is going to take us through a quick journey through these four Gospels, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And as we go through those Gospels, we're going to get a full picture, not only about Jesus's coming, but also the work that he did that bears witness to the fact that he is the Son of God. There are numerous stories in the scriptures where Jesus would confront the Pharisees and the teachers of his day and say, listen, if you don't believe because of the things that I say, because of the words that I'm teaching you, then believe because of the things that I do. So what Jesus was doing is saying, listen, my life is an open book to you. You could take my words and go back and verify that I am saying the things that my Father has said. And as well, he tells his people, listen, and look at the work that I'm doing. Quick example, remember John is in prison, and John sends word through his disciples back to Jesus and says, listen, are you the one who was to come? And Jesus says, I want you to go back and tell John what you see. That the lame walk, the blind see, the dead are raised. See, this is work that only the Son of God could do. And it was bearing witness to who he was. And then the ultimate, the sacrifice of Christ on the cross and the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And so suddenly now we begin to recognize, oh, this is the Jesus who was promised way back in that Old Testament. And now he is the fulfillment of all these promises. And now he has come declaring the kingdom of God, opening the door so that you and I can enter in. That's what this whole section of Messiah is going to be about. And we're going to have some really good times going through a number of these passages so that we would find that we would be absolutely encouraged by what we are reading, and that it would bring a certainty of faith into one's life. Now we turn our attention to the next portion, which would be Pentecost. Now, if expectations are all about what was in the mind and hearts of the people as they were waiting for Jesus to come, Messiah was all about the disclosing of Jesus, and that's taking place in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Well, now in Pentecost is all about that pivotal event. You know, early on in the book of Acts, again, Luke is writing, and Luke writes and says that they are to wait in Jerusalem for the gift that was promised. That gift was the Holy Spirit. Remember in the Gospel of John, Jesus would gather his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion. He would gather them all together, and he would say to them, listen, the time has come for me to depart this world to be with the Father. And they were all upset. And Jesus says, you shouldn't be upset, because this is necessary. It was written, right, that the Son of Man must suffer these things, that he would be betrayed, beaten, flogged, and crucified, dead, buried. But on the third day, he says, I will rise again. And you can't fault those early disciples. I mean, it'd be like you and me, right? We're hearing this for the first time, but we've never seen anyone rise from the dead. You know, whenever I do a funeral, and I am consciously aware that there is no experience that we will ever have in this side of heaven, right, where the finality of what has just taken place hits home. Those of us who have lost loved ones and they are dear to your heart, is there any moment in your life where you're not keenly aware of that loss? Right? And thankfully, by God's grace, sometimes he gives you, enough comfort so that it doesn't become so overwhelming. But that wound, it heals a bit, right? I lost my mom, lost her a little bit every day because of Alzheimer's. I remember when I finally lost my mom, it just dawned on me, like, I will never see my mom on this side of eternity again. And every once in a while, it would just bring some sadness into my life. And as time passed on, I would eat certain food or hear certain music, or someone would reference an event, and I would that would provide an opportunity for me to just spend some time thinking about my mom in that period. And it brought comfort. It would make me smile. Or I cook something now and I think, yeah, my mom, she would have liked that. That was her recipe. Or I remember sharing this meal with my mom so many times. And so, when you do a funeral, you are keenly aware that there is a departure And nothing in this life is ever like that. You know, you lose a job, you get a new job. You know, you lose some money, you make more money. Yeah, you know, your house burns down. Well, maybe you're going to find another dwelling, right? Not minimizing the pain and the hurt with there, but there's still an opportunity for you to continue. But death, it comes with a finality that everyone understands. And so here now we have Jesus. Jesus comes and he says, listen, don't worry. He says, I am going to rise from the dead. And if I rise, you are going to rise with me. And it wasn't really until his resurrection that really hit home. And it changed those apostles, didn't it? Peter, who was there denying Jesus, right? 3 times, right? Like, you know, I don't know him. I have nothing to do with him. In a matter of a few days, Jesus now resurrected and confronts Peter. And then what's the next story that you read about Peter? Peter is standing in Acts chapter 2, declaring the full gospel of this resurrected Jesus from the dead. He's being arrested by the Sanhedrin and told to be quiet. And he says, how can I be quiet? There's only one name given among men whereby we must be saved, and his name is Jesus. What happened to the guy who was cowering and denying Jesus? Now he is boldly affirming that Jesus is the Son of God. There is no other name given among men whereby we must be saved. Yeah, it only is accounted for because he has come to see Jesus in his glory. So, my friends, Pentecost, and I'll have more to talk about this tomorrow, but Pentecost begins now with Jesus's resurrection and the Spirit of God pouring out. And tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more about what Pentecost is all about as we go through this book of Acts. And hopefully this little overview is just giving you a sense of where we're going to be going in our study. So expectations, all about that period from the last book of the Old Testament to the first book in the New Testament, from Malachi to Matthew. What was really going on during that period? Messiah, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, telling us the big picture about who Jesus is, what he accomplished, right? And now the P stands for Pentecost. We began today by just taking a look at the outpouring of the Spirit, the gift. God, Jesus told us, right? He says, let not your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you might be also. I don't leave you as orphans, but I'm going to give you my comforter. He will guide you into all truth. He will convict you of sin, righteousness, judgment. Yeah, we're not alone in this world. The very Spirit of God bears witness with our spirit. This Spirit is a spirit of power, love, and of discipline. We got this because he's gotten a hold of us. Well, why don't we just stop here today? Want to thank you again for joining me on this Tuesday, March the 25th. You go out, seize the day, always remembering that God is good all the time. And Lord willing, we'll spend a little bit more time again tomorrow. God bless.